All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Tuesday, March 8th of 2022. Thanks for tuning into the stream here today. If you were with us on yesterday's stream, we had almost a 2-hour long marathon stream here. It was a fun way to kick the week off. All kinds of different questions, conversations. We learned how to pronounce DeJounte Murray's name, which was a bit of a highlight. So if you missed that video is now up, just like all the other Office Hours videos are, but that's now up, timestamped up on our YouTube channel. So if you've got maybe a long drive or a long walk or something ahead of you in the next couple days, nice little 2-hour long stream there to go and review. That is full of good information, good stuff there. We've got a few questions in our queue here for today's stream. We'll get things started talking a little bit of actually, there's a couple questions here about single entry strategy specifically. So we had talked a little bit about that yesterday, but I want to kind of more directly talk a little bit of single entry strategy here. Let's see, a couple questions on, let's see what else we have here. A couple questions on actual scores, how to find upside. So a few good questions here to get things started. But as always, if you've got questions for me, pop them into the Slack, pop them into the YouTube chat, and we will get into it here. So I am going to just go ahead and copy and paste Gary's question here. This came in via email. And Gary said, I play single entry contests. What's a good lineup building process? Which I think is a simple, but I don't even know what I'm trying to say. There's a lot. It's a simple question, but it is a lot to talk about here on this particular concept. And I know Matt also had asked, any advice on using SaberSim for GPPs for single entry or 3-entry max tournaments? So I wanted to talk about this a little bit first. A few things right off the bat. First of all, single entry is not a spectacularly different strategy or game type or anything like that than multi-entry in terms of lineup construction. I think it's actually kind of a common misnomer, I guess, or there's so much content out there that is like specifically geared towards single entry that it almost implies that there are different strategies overall into how you would build a winning lineup for a single entry contest versus a contest for a multi-entry. And that's not really the case, right? And you can actually kind of validate this with the sliders, right? If you were playing a, let's say you're comparing a 5,000 person contest and you're looking at a single entry versus a 20 max, right? The correlation slider, the ownership fade, the sim variance slider, they change, but there's not a dramatic difference in between how much these change from a single entry to a multi-entry. And the same concepts of what is important to be successful in these lineups still applies. When I play single entry contests, it's typically a part of a much bigger set of lineups for that particular night. And most of the time, I'll just toss a few random lineups from my pool into the single entries and roll with that. That said, if you are playing just a single lineup or just a small set of lineups, and especially if you are used to hand building, I think there are some very cool ways to use SaberSim to help accommodate that. I think in general, when I hear people that just play single entry lineups, a lot of them come from kind of a more of a hand building background. And I think you can leverage our simulations and the powerful data that we have on SaberSim and still have a lot of success building single entry lineups. SaberSim is not just a tool for multi-entry players only. We'll wrap around back to that thought here towards the end of the answer to this question, but I do want to stress that as well. Another very common misconception I hear, especially hopping on some other streams with some of our partners and things like that, is people think that if you are not multi-entering, or if you're not max multi-entering, right, playing 150 or playing 20 lineups, then SaberSim doesn't have any value for you. That's not the case. There's still a lot of value here. So let's get into it. Let's start with what I would do if you want to build effective lineups, single entry kind of lineups, right? So use the default settings for the contest, right? So single entry, 5,000 entrants, and then build yourself a big pool to work with, right? This can be about as big as you want, up to 1,500. I think 500 is generally going to be fine. For this, let's build 1,000 lineups. And what we'll do is we'll look at the first 5 here so we can build these lineups. So, and what this is going to do, this pool size of 1,000 here, is it is going to allow us to kind of sort through and hand build. We're essentially going to hand build a lineup from a pool of 1,000 lineups that already exist, that are already viable for this contest. So we're asking SaberSim right now, what are the best 1,000 lineups I could play in this? And we know that if we exceed these 1,000, if in other words, we try to do something that it doesn't show up in this first 1,000, SaberSim's saying that kind of lineup construction is not part of the first 1,000 lineups that would be successful for this particular contest. And it's a very good flag that maybe we should back off of that. Let's go ahead and slightly tweak a projection here so we can see some lineups. And let's get to work. From here, right, there's nothing wrong with just rocking and rolling with the first lineup you see, right? If you love the lineup, do it. That's great. But you can start to add value by kind of looking at particular, maybe just looking at particular things you don't like. So, or do like, or want, right? So maybe one stands out immediately to me is, I don't know if I want to play 4-man stack here, right? So maybe right off the bat, I'm just going to remove this stack type here. And now it's going to kind of serve me another lineup here. This also has a 4 stack, a lot of Phoenix value tonight. So let's remove 4 stacks. Okay, let's do this a different way because we're getting a ton of Phoenix 4 stacks. Let's go say no more Phoenix 4 stacks, right? Okay, so we get served a Phoenix 5 stack. So I guess there's just a ton of value on Phoenix, not a lot of value elsewhere on the slate. So okay, getting something that looks a little more balanced now here. And then let's keep it going, right? Let's see if we can find another guy. Maybe in our research, we thought that LaMelo Ball was kind of an interesting play. So let's lock LaMelo Ball in, right? Okay, so now we're getting a little bit closer here. So maybe there's an interesting lineup that we like here, right? As soon as you get to the point where you are happy, right, then that's your lineup, right? We're slowly sorting through our pool of 1,000. Right now we're at lineup 40, so we have a ton of room to continue to go. Let's keep it going here, and let's see if we can find something else. Let's say we're going to take a really aggressive stand on this slate tonight just for fun, and we want to totally fade Payne in our single entry build, right? We're going to run through a lot of lineups pretty quickly, but now we're at 226. This lineup has another Cleveland 4 stack, which I've decided for this particular example, I don't want to play 4 stacks. So we can keep it going here, right? Maybe there are other players that you've locked, right? Maybe we do. Maybe we still want Giannis in the lineup, right? We're playing Giannis. At a certain point, if you make too many adjustments, right? Let's try to just make this happen, right? Let's lock Durant in there as well. At a certain point, you may see this message show up at the bottom. So I hit lock button on Durant, and it said, we need to expand your lineup pool in order to max your exposures. It means there's no lineup in the first 1,000 here that matches everything we just put in. That has Ball, Giannis, and Durant, and has no 4 stacks of those teams, of Cleveland or the Suns, right? Now, one way to take this is to get frustrated and say, I can't make the lineup I want. But I think a much better way of using this is saying, oh, this kind of lineup construction is not in the first 1,000 best lineups you could play for this contest. Maybe I'm going to take a different approach here. I'm going to unlock Durant, and let's try to do something a little bit different. So I think this can be a really, really good way to use SaberSim to build big pools of lineups that are viable for a single entry contest quickly, and to kind of hand pick your lineup out of your pool of 1,000 instead of trying to hand build a lineup from scratch. What it's really going to help you do is it's going to avoid situations where you just have like landmines in your lineup because you do something that really, really is inefficient, right? So that is what I would recommend in terms of process. So again, kind of to summarize here, strategically, same concepts apply. Correlation, ownership, variance, still important concepts. Not a dramatic difference in overall strategy from single entry to multi-entry. But the process-wise, I think there's a very cool process way of building a single entry lineup on SaberSim here. The last note on this that I will say before we move on is if I can move you in the direction of playing more multi-entry, it's going to benefit you in the long term. When you play more lineups, when you're entered into more entries on a given slate, you're going to smooth out your variance. You're going to give yourself more opportunities to build high upside lineups more quickly, right? If I'm playing 20 lineups tonight and you're playing 1, right? I have to play 5 slates before my average expectation would be to have a lineup in the top 1%. You would have to play 100 slates before your average expectation would be to have a lineup in the top 1%. So it is far more easy to be successful and to build a bankroll and to smooth out your variance playing multi-entries a night. I know that is a little bit challenging on a traditional optimizer. If you are used to hand building or have used other tools in the past, building 20 or 150 good lineups with a traditional tool can be very hard. With SaberSim, it is as easy to build one lineup as it is to build 150. So I highly recommend exploring the idea of playing a little bit more multi-entry if you are mostly or have historically been mostly a single entry player, because it will have a profound effect on your ability to realize your edge more quickly. So, but Gary, let me know if you have questions after watching this. We'll get you a timestamped recording to this particular part of the stream. And if you have follow-up questions for me, just let me know. But in the meantime, let's move on. Okay, question from JSJR here. And he said, how can we see the potential upside of a player in our player pool? I think there's a variety of different ways to do this. I think one good way to do that is to study the percentiles, right? The percentiles will show it's kind of a visualization of the probabilities of certain players, right? The 95th percentile, for example, will show essentially that player's ceiling, the score that player will hit or exceed 5% of the time or less, right? So Durant is going to score 68.5 points or more 5% of the time, right? Just studying percentiles alone, I think, can be a pretty good way to visualize upside. In terms of, upside on a lineup level, I think there's a couple ways to do that. I mean, a test build, in effect, gives you that ability, right? If you go in and say, you build 20 lineups at settings that are optimized for a 20 max from 10 to 50K people, right? You can look at your exposures and your leverage here and kind of get an idea of what the highest upside plays are on the slate relative to ownership and correlation, and do it this way, right? This is implying that for a 20 max from 10 to 50K people on DraftKings for tonight's slate, the highest upside plays are Ayton and Payne. Then kind of followed by this second tier of Giannis, Mobley, and Shaman, right? You could even study a bigger section of your lineups or maybe the entire pool and kind of just see what are the players that are showing up in the most lineups overall, right? It's kind of clear what the highest upside players are by doing it this way as well. So you could also run the research build, right? If you want to look at like pure upside, essentially like slate breaking, show up in the optimal lineup upside, a build like this, right? Which I'm sure we are all very familiar with now, or at least those of you that have watched at least one other office hours before, right? A build like this is going to build single simulation slate optimals, right? So you can study the lineups that are coming out of a research build, or the exposures in particular that are coming out of a research build, and get an idea of what players have the highest upside to show up in the optimal lineup for the actual slate, right? So let's run this and see what we get here. Give this just a second to run here. All right. Cool. So these would be, let's put this to 1,500, right? The highest upside players, the players that are most likely to show up in the optimal lineup on the slate tonight, right? Cameron Payne, DeAndre Ayton, Shaman, Antetokounmpo, right? Similar list here. Not a ton of differentiation here, but this would be another way of doing it. So that's my favorite way to find upside. I like to run build lineups to see what players fit into lineups, right? So all right. There was a note here. I'll touch on this real quickly. This is also from JSJR here. And he said, if it's the graph, can you go into depth on how to properly use the graph? I assume you're talking about this. I actually don't think like on a slate-to-slate research level that this is that useful, right? I don't often go into a player's range of outcomes or distributions and learn something or decide to do something because of this. I think it's interesting to pull up for educational purposes on stream here sometimes to kind of show it. But I don't think it's the best tool for research. I think by far the best thing to use this graph for is when you are playing a new sport that you're unfamiliar with. You can get an idea of what distributions look like and how variant a sport is and how maybe normally distributed or not normally distributed a player's range of outcomes is by looking at the graph for that particular sport. That's probably the best usage I think there is for it. So, all right. Oh, Reed, I hope you're doing well. I see your picture in the Office Hours channel. Hope you are doing okay. But I'm glad I'm helping you pass the time here. All right, cool. So there was a question here. So Matt had asked a question. The second part of this question was about like the single entry and 3-max strategy, which we kind of already covered. There was a little bit of a note here. I guess I don't know if this is actually a question, but he said, due to office hours, I've done well in NFL and NBA, but struggling in PGA and GPPs. Yeah, so golf's hard. Like, first of all, I just want to say that golf is a tough DFS sport. It is probably the hardest one, to be completely honest. Like, the edges that you can push in golf are much lower. It is a harder sport to beat. There is no correlation factor in golf, right? Which is there's not direct correlation like there is from a QB to a wide receiver that we can take advantage of in NFL, but there's also not really like lineup construction based correlations like we get in NASCAR, right? Like drivers, since they are all driving in the same race and they literally affect each other in that race, there are lineup constructions that are more viable than others because drivers kind of correlate to each other in that way. Golf, just because everybody's playing the same tournament, right? So playing the same course, there's not really a big correlative element in there. Overall, one of the biggest edges that you're going to end up getting in golf is ownership inefficiencies, but ownership projections, not even projections, actual ownerships that you get in the contests often are pretty efficient. When you are pushing an edge on ownership, a lot of times it's because a golfer is 5% too owned or 5% under owned. And I think the best thing you can do is try to capitalize on that in your individual lineups. But it is a sport where I would say right off the bat, strict bankroll management and contest selection principles are going to take you very far in golf DFS. You should expect to have a lower ROI and a lower edge in the sport from the start. And that should show up in the way that you choose to manage your bankroll and what contests you play in, right? If you are torn between how much volume to play on an exciting week in golf DFS like we have this week, play on the lower side of that, especially until at least you can prove that you've got kind of a consistent process that does allow you to be profitable. With that said, again, I think probably the highest value thing you can do in golf DFS with SaberSim in particular, I think there's really two things. I think being really aggressive with the way you treat ownership. That comes, one, with studying the ownership projections, but also adjusting them, right? Because our model for ownership is an algorithmic-based model, right? This is a computer-driven model. It is assuming what a perfectly rational, sharp field would do based on the inputs of our projections. If our projections are not what the field thinks a player should be projected for, or if there is narrative-based steam going on, right, on a particular golfer, we're not going to pick that up. Let's see if I can find a guy here. Okay, so just kind of being plugged into, I would say, golf DFS Twitter throughout the week so far, right? A couple names that I think we are under projecting on our ownership projections. Billy Horschel, who's been chalky for a few straight weeks. He's golfing really well right now. His recent form is good, right? And Matt Fitzpatrick, who the perception of Fitzpatrick this week is that he is underpriced at 7,700, right? These are things that I've kind of learned from just being plugged into golf DFS Twitter and just kind of, watching some videos. I'd mentioned before, I like Rick Run Good's content. I like Pat Mayo, right? As a good way to get familiar with the slate if you're new to the sport and you don't really have an intuitive sense of who's going to be chalky, right? And then from there, bump those projections up, right? At least be directionally correct. Don't worry about getting the number exactly right? Give these guys a bump so they show up as chalkier plays, right? Once you've added some value by adjusting ownership projections, getting it there, I would be aggressive with the way let me say one other thing. I also like to do a little bit of player pool pruning in golf. Mostly because the main reason why is because I like to pump up my ownership fade slider. I like to be aggressive with ownership because I think it's one of the only ways to get an edge here. And if you pump up the ownership fade slider without giving the builder anything else, it's going to build you a ton of lineups that are really overweight to these guys with low ownership projections, which are these low min salary guys, right? A lot of times a lineup that has, I would say like 3 of these guys under 6K, a lot of times isn't super effective or a super strong strategy, right? In terms of building lineups built for upside. So I think you can do a couple things. I think actually historically what I've done is I've filtered my pool by make cut percent and basically eliminated players below a certain make cut percentage. But as I'm talking here, I actually think this is a really good opportunity to show off our new groups functionality. So an alternative would be, right, let's play aggressively here. Let's pump up our ownership fade. Let's do 20 lineups, right? But pump up our ownership fade. I also like to play with very high sim variance here. I do think you can get a little bit of an edge just leveraging the sims as directly as possible here. So let's pump both of these up a little and let's set a group rule. And I'm going to say, let's do salaries. Let's do all the golfers under 7K. Oops. And let's put them in a group and say less than or equal to 1. And let's also make a second group. And in this case, I'm going to take all my golfers under 8K. And say, I don't know exactly how I would do this, but as a starting point, let's say less than or equal to, oops, I messed that up. I think I messed this up. Hold on, I'm going to start over because I got confused. So let's do less than or equal to 1, right? Those are our under 7K golfers, right? So all we're doing here, again, this isn't a must. I don't think this is like the only way to play golf DFS with SaberSim, but I think this is one way to kind of help push an ownership edge while still building high upside lineups. Okay, so less than or equal to 1 for that group. And then let's make a new rule. And for this group, I'm going to do everybody under 8K. This is basically just making sure that the builder doesn't respond to a higher than average ownership fade by saying, okay, how about a ton of really low owned golfers? Yeah, this looks pretty good. I don't even know if this second rule is actually necessary, to be completely honest. But I'm going to put it in here anyway. And I'm going to say for this one, less than or equal to 3. And now let's see what kind of lineups we get. And what this is going to do, again, so I think ideally you would have gone through and spent some time studying the ownership projections, probably adjusting a couple other golfers. The main thing you want to do is you want to identify the super chalk, right? For any given tournament, there's probably 5 different guys that are going to be about, I would say 18% or more, 20% or more. And those are really the chalk on a given week. Those are the guys that you want to kind of make sure that you've identified correctly here. And now let's look at our lineups, right? Okay, so I think we're heading in the right track here now, right? There's obviously ways to continue to iterate on this. I would say one thing is with your ownership fade cranked this high, you're probably virtually always going to get one golfer that's really low projected. You can see it is basically packing in 1 6K guy and 2 7K guys into every single lineup to just get that ownership fade down as low as possible. But these are very low-owned lineups. Now, this is not the only way to play. Again, the key to golf is not to just optimize for the lowest ownership projected lineup possible. But given that it is basically the only edge that we can really push here, I think it's a great way to try to get a little bit of an edge in your golf lineups. The one other thing I would recommend too is to look at your leverage, right? There is rarely a situation, even for 20 lineups, where it makes sense to be spectacularly overexposed to a particular golfer. I have no interest in playing 75% Luke List, even in 20 lineups. I would probably bring this down to, say, 30%. And in fact, I'm probably almost never really going to be far over 50% to any one golfer. So I would probably feel a little bit more comfortable, approaching the slate like this. But that's I would say kind of a quick, maybe a golf overview there. So I see some questions in office hours. We'll go ahead. We'll get to them. All right. This is all office hours. I see some questions in YouTube chat. So I'm going to hit this last question that's in Slack, and then we'll hop over to YouTube chat. This is from Ramsey. And Ramsey says, still in my first week using SaberSim. Welcome. Really enjoy office hours. My question is there a way to see previous projections to see how they matched up to actual results? Thanks. Yeah. For most sports, not all, we have actual scores available for past slates, at least for the main sports, basketball, football, and baseball. I think we have them for hockey too. And then I don't know necessarily on golf, NASCAR, esports, things like that. But if we go to yesterday's NBA slate, for example, there is a column that will show up for actual. So you can see the actual score compared to the projected score for any of these guys. So, all right, cool. Let's hop over to YouTube chat. John says, what's a good rule of thumb after having a profitable night? How much should you keep and how much should you put back into your pocket? That is a question that only you can answer, John. Where that line is, I think some people, will have a $1,000 bankroll and everything above and beyond that is profit that goes into the pocket as long as the $1,000 bankroll is maintained. Some people will have a six-figure bankroll where, building up to that particular level, like everything is bankroll building until you get to that point. I would say, ask yourself how much you're comfortable wagering on a given night. If you had maybe a $1,000, $2,000 bankroll beforehand and you take down 10K in the $4.20 max for an NBA slate, right? Jumping up and playing the equivalent percentage of bankroll would be a 10x jump on the following night. Now, you don't need to do that all at once. One of the things I always recommend is if you have a big win that really that changes like the entire order of magnitude of how much your bankroll is, take time to adjust to that and don't feel like you need to just start playing everything you just won the night before all over again. But in terms of how much do you leave in the account, how much do you take out, that is really your decision. It depends on what your goals are, I would say primarily. And I think it's probably a good idea to set those goals beforehand, right? For yourself. I have an understanding of what you would take out if you won a certain contest beforehand, before entering it, right? When you look at the winnings for a particular contest, right? What does winning a $10,000 contest mean to you in terms of what would come out and what would come in or go in, right? I think that's also a good just mental space to be in for DFS as well, because then you have an understanding, the worst thing would be to be unprepared for that and then have a big win and then scale up your bankroll and then lose a lot of that over the next month without having felt like that was ever a conscious decision, right? Like, for me, a lot of what I win stays in the roll up to a certain point, and I'm comfortable and I understand that like it's a part of the DFS that like a lot of that is going to go back into the DFS ecosystem before it comes back out as future profits. But if that wasn't a conscious decision, that would probably be pretty painful to watch your winnings go. So ultimately going to be your call. But B Swifty said, most of my success in NBA is the smaller slates, 5 games or less, or late night slates. Is there anything different you do differently for building your lineups on bigger slates, or typically stay your same process? I keep the same process. I've heard this before. I think one of the things that does happen on bigger slates, or one of the things that I think actually happens on smaller slates, let me put it that way, is because like that sim variance slider, the need to play higher variance strategies overall goes up because there's less players in the pool. the higher the sim variance slider gets by default, the more we are leveraging individual sims as opposed to average projections, which in some ways I think is our biggest product differentiator, right? For example, if you're playing a 2-game night slate and the sim variance by default is 10, which it typically is, or very close, you're using a single game simulation to build every lineup, right? Or very nearly a single game simulation to build every lineup. Right? Somebody using average projections and trying to build high upside lineups for a very small slate has a lot of uphill climbing to do, because to get to that level of thinking about that level of variance using average projections is very difficult. On the flip side, if you have a very big slate, like last night, we had a 8-game slate. While there's still a certain edge in using a SaberSim that is leveraging simulations and keeping track of correlation and ownership throughout your lineups, somebody using average projections is going to get a little bit closer to what is optimal when the default need for higher variances is a little bit lower. So my process does not change based on the size of the slate, not dramatically, I would say. Like I change my sliders. Well, actually, no. I generally use the default sliders regardless of slate size, or as they change for slate size. I would say maybe the only thing that changes in my process for smaller slates versus larger slates on a night-to-night basis is where I kind of draw the line of what players I want in my pool, right? I've mentioned before on stream here, one of the things that I like to do in NBA is, this is on at 15 by default. I will turn this down for slates that are like lower than 4 games ish. So if there's only 2 games or 3 games on a slate, I will bring this down to let some of those players that are a little further in the rotation get into my pool. On bigger slates, I will turn this up, because even if 8-game slate like last night, right? This is a good example. Even if let's find some guys, right? Josh Christopher is a 6x value at min price, and Naz Reid is a 6x value at 3.3, right? I don't want these guys. Last night, I think when all this value is on the slate is what I mean, right? I think last night, I was at, for the 8-game slate, I think I had this at like 20. So that's one thing that can change. But otherwise, I mostly play the same process night to night. So, on a big slate too, when there's more players in the pool, it's harder to get the nuts. Like, it's harder to land on that exact optimal lineup, but it's harder for everybody. You often get a little bit more of the ownership inefficiencies can be a little bit more dramatic on slates where there's more options, just because there's more wrong players to click on. So I don't know. It goes both ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Where, like, yes, it's harder, when you have 8 games on the slate, it's harder to land on the Jokic or Luka or Embiid scoring 75, but less lineups in the pool overall have those guys as well. So Ryan says, advantage of playing 1 cash lineup versus 2. I haven't played cash, honestly, in over a year, maybe a little bit more than that, but I never liked the playing 2 strategy. I think the best argument I've heard of playing multiple cash lineups is if there are basically, 2, typically cash games in virtually every sport, there will be a pool of, say, 30 viable players, maximum maybe 20 viable players that you can actually build from. And there'll typically be one core construction of, say, 5 or 6 guys that everybody's playing, sharp cash players. Sorry, I shouldn't say everybody, that all sharp cash game players are playing. And then there'll be kind of a rotation between the final 1 to 3 players in the lineup based on your individual projection model or how you want to tackle the slate. If you are interested in smoothing out your variance as much as possible, you can kind of hedge those 2 outcomes by playing 2 different lineups, right? But I've never been a big fan of it. I think the biggest way, or the best way, to smooth your variance out playing cash games is instead to just focus a lot on head-to-heads, right? Instead of smoothing your variance out by the lineups that you're playing, smooth your variance by the opponents you're playing, right? Play more head-to-heads than 50-50s, and try to play as many unique players in your head-to-heads as possible. Don't play $101 head-to-heads against the same guy. Play $101 head-to-heads against 100 different opponents, and there'll be a natural spread of different cash lineups you're up against, which will kind of diversify your range of outcomes in the contest, all with a single lineup. The problem with playing 2 cash game lineups is at the end of the day, you're always sacrificing projected points somewhere. And the primary strategic goal of cash is to play the highest projected lineup possible, right? There are some exceptions if there is a huge ownership discrepancy somewhere. But if there's a huge ownership discrepancy, it's probably true that your projections are just bad. But that's one. Or if there's a specific late swap situation where you have to or you want to sacrifice a couple projected points to give yourself the ability to swap to potential news. Those are the only 2 situations I can think of. Other than that, you're almost always incentivized to play the highest projected lineup possible. And by definition, if you play 2 cash game lineups, one is worse than the other. You might as well just take the points, right? Sacrificing a point of projection in cash games is fairly significant. Sacrificing more than that is just bad, right? It's been a while since I've run a cash game build. Let's build some cash game lineups and just see how things are looking for tonight's slate. But takes a little longer to build cash game lineups because we kind of brute force the optimals. We use a little bit of a different build method here in the optimizer to make sure that we are building the highest projected lineups possible. For that reason, exactly, right? Missing a point or building a lineup that is projected for 1 less point actually has an impact. Let's see what we get here, though. Okay. I'm going to very slightly adjust some projections here and see what the highest projected lineups are. Okay, so here's a good example, right? Just the 2 highest lineups possible. So say you want to hedge here, right? And you're going to play a little bit of this lineup and a little bit of this lineup. There is a difference between these 2 lineups, like a meaningful one. There's a 2.5 point difference. You are sacrificing 2.5 projected points to enter this lineup into contests where you could have just played this one. And I just think that I think that long-term doesn't pay out for you in a way that is useful. So. All right. Dante said, what's Shady Advice's secret? He always is at the top, especially in night slates and showdowns. Shady Advice is pretty transparent with what he does with this process in our Slack community. First of all, congrats, Shady. 100K last night, took down the fadeaway. That's awesome to see. But really, I actually think the other day on the heels of a different bink, right? Shady's running pretty hot right now. He actually said that there is no secret, right? There is no secret settings that all of a sudden you get there and you just start binking. In that comment, he said, strong bankroll management and contest selection principles and patience, right? Allowing yourself the time necessary to realize your gains. I think there is hopefully, maybe if Shady's listening, whenever you're done working on your ROI chart, go ahead and pop the link to the tweet in Slack for our community here. But I know one thing that Shady also preaches is that there are downswings for every upswing, right? You have to kind of lose a lot to win a little in DFS. And a lot of times when you're living in 100K screenshot land on DFS Twitter, it implies that there are people winning all the time, and they are not, right? They are playing sound strategies that allow them the opportunity to put more of their fair share of lineups into the top 1% of the payout positions in a contest, and playing with strong enough bankroll management and contest selection principles to get there, to give them enough runway and time to realize that. So, but it is, I see Brad saying here too, I don't want all the secrets, just an idea of where to start. I honestly, I know this is a little bit in jest. I know this is a little bit in fun, but the moment that you can get over the idea that there are secrets and that this idea of secrets is kind of persistent in the DFS culture overall, right? The secret discords, right? You may have heard of those in different cash game circles. There's whenever after an NFL Sunday, if there's a cash lineup that is popular amongst all the sharps, there is sometimes an idea that there's a secret cash games Discord where everybody discusses the optimal lineups. The idea that there are secrets held from you in GPP land where if they were revealed, you would win $100,000 every night. It doesn't exist. It really doesn't. We know this mathematically, right? You have a 1% on average chance of placing a lineup into the top 1% in a contest that pays out 20 to 20% of the field. Your average expectation is to win any money at all only 1 out of 5 times. The best players are very good at DFS, but they are not changing a average expectation of 20% of a payout to 80%, nor are they making something that has a 1% chance of happening a 10% chance of happening. And Brad said, no, definitely just having fun in here. Yeah, and I totally understand that. But I don't know. I always want to set that stage and make that clear because it's an important lesson to learn. There was an episode of, Theory of DFS, Jordan Cooper's podcast, where Neil Orfield was on from a few weeks ago. And kind of rambling here. I don't see maybe a couple other questions. We'll get to everything before we're done here. But there was an episode of the Theory of DFS podcast, and Neil was talking about his past football season. And he had posted 3 separate 100K screenshots from binks in this NFL season. And people were surprised to hear in this podcast that actually after those 3 100Ks, that he was still unprofitable on the season, right? That is the level of swings that kind of doesn't get shown when you're living in screenshot land. And screenshot land can make you think that it's all roses and that the best players win every night. And if simply you understood the secrets, you too would win every night. The true secret is bankroll management and contest selection and patience. I assure you that if you are building lineups, especially for NBA, I guess NBA is the main primary sport in season right now. I assure you that if you are building lineups on SaberSim that are kind of representative of the general process that we preach, that you are building lineups that are positive expected value. There is absolutely value that can be added. There is a difference between the most basic way of using the tool and the maybe potentially the highest value add possible. But even at the most basic way, I assure you are building high positive expected value lineups. And if you give yourself time to realize the edge you get there, it will pay off for you. So, but Will said, this is a cash game thing. Percentile equals 50, please. Is that true? Is that really? I wonder how much, especially in NBA, I wonder how important this actually is. I think this is at least theoretically correct, but maybe we can have Will come on and preach the value of using the median projection for your cash game builds instead of the mean. But anyway, looks like some fun in chat about the secret Discord conversation here. See, Josh said, just soak up all the knowledge you can and go review the top players and lineups every night and just listen. You got to follow NBA every day to be good at it. Knowing rotations and minutes are so important. Maybe. I think that's definitely a way to get an edge. That's what Max does, right? If you've seen Max's video, he is very plugged into rotations, injuries, where minutes are going. I don't do any of that. I trust the Sims when it comes to that, right? I'm most interested, and Max lead swaps as well. I don't want to give the indication that I'm doing this and he's not, but I'll say, you know what? Let me trust the Sims. Let me assume that the Sims know the rotations. I'll sacrifice a little bit of edge there to basically to maximize the edge I can get by late swapping. I also try to spread out as much as possible, right? I'm playing every single slate every night because I want to lower my variance as much as possible. I want to get as many lineups in play as possible. So Marcus said, hey, Jordan, we just want the answers to the test. What's up? Patience, yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, here we go. I had a feeling Matt might be in here. I was like, if somebody else, Matt says, I very much disagree with Will. Two players can have the same 50th percentile, but different means. Maybe we need a little bit of debate. Matt says, you lose a lot of nuance when you use percentiles. That's fine for GPP, but even partial point matters for cash. Yeah, maybe we can have like a DFS debate show. It'd be kind of fun. I don't know if we want to spend all that time talking about cash games, but I feel like this is a bit of a contentious point on if there's actually a theoretical optimal approach to using a mean versus a median projection for cash games. I don't know. It's interesting. Let's see. Marcus said, would you mind doing a FanDuel run? No, I would not mind. But what would you like to talk about here? I don't know. Maybe Marcus, why don't you let me know? I see some other questions coming in, so maybe why don't you let me know what you are what you want to talk about here, and then we'll come back. But John says there will always be things like Mitchell Robinson getting the stomach flu 2 minutes into the game that happened. Yeah, no, and that's a really good example of just how much variance is in the game, even in the lower variance sport like NBA, right? Those things are unpredictable, right? I mean, those things alone. I think there are also people out there that will try to tell you that those kinds of things can be predicted, but that's obviously not true, and that just goes to show why you have to be somewhat cautious with the way that you manage your bankroll, because those kinds of things are possible, right? It's only going to get more that way as we finish up the NBA season too. So. Jay said, I haven't researched this yet, but I was curious if there was math behind it. Which sport among NBA, NFL, MLB, and NHL is on average the most profitable for a DFS player? I mean, it's going to depend a lot on your particular skill set and what what sports you are most familiar with. I think all four, you can have a pretty defined edge. I think NFL is pretty conventionally agreed to be the softest fields. They also have enormous fields. There are so many casual NFL DFS fans and players that the quality of the average lineup in your contest that you're playing is way lower than other sports, right? They're just, when there's, when there's 250,000 lineups in the minimax for NFL, right? Even taking into account every player playing 150 lineups, there's just not enough sharp players to fill all those lineups up. So NFL is extremely soft, but the contests are so big that your raw probability of winning any given week is a lot lower. So it's probably one of your highest theoretical ROI sports, but it's probably one of the hardest to realize an edge in. I think baseball is a kind of a nice middle ground sport. Very easy to get an edge in baseball because correlation is so high and variance is so high. You often end up with in baseball, you end up with big ownership inefficiencies and poor lineup construction inefficiencies, right? That I think you can, there's also big enough contests on average that the fields play pretty softly. I think NBA, all of these sports have an edge. I think NBA can be a pretty profitable sport, especially because of how poorly late swap is used. I really believe that late swap is the biggest edge in NBA DFS in 2022 here. Sounds like the start of it sounds like a YouTube video we already have up somewhere probably. But not only, I mean, there's such a small portion of the field, especially at lower stakes, that is even late swapping, that even knows what, I mean, let's start here. It is probably a minority of the field that even actually knows what late swap is, especially at lower stakes in NBA. There is even a smaller subset that late swaps that even makes the attempt to do that when news breaks. And then there is a much, much, much smaller percentage of the field that does that in a way that is optimal. That isn't just swapping into the new highest average projected lineup every time news breaks or something like that. That I think there's an enormous edge. I think the edge in NBA would go down, or it would change pretty significantly if you couldn't late swap. But I think that given that we have that, there's a pretty significant edge there. NHL has a lot in common with baseball. I think there is ownership inefficiency. There is lineup construction inefficiency with stacking. But because contests are so small, the best players in the NHL lobby take up a lot of equity in your contests. So it can be tougher to beat. If assuming, I'm going to answer this question and say, if you played with perfect bankroll management principles, and essentially your risk of you were playing perfect bankroll management, right? In other words, you have as much runway as it takes to realize your expected value, and that you play for like a long enough period of time that your actual ROI becomes equal to your theoretical ROI. I would say most profitable would probably be NFL, tie between NBA and MLB as they are currently set up, and then NHL is my take. So Marcus said, appreciate it. Just seeing what the optimal is for FanDuel versus DK. Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I've got other questions here. So we'll build a cash game on the FanDuel side and just see what we're getting here. Not that 3 p.m. Eastern NBA cash game optimals are of the most value anyway, right? Yeah, Josh says NFL is the easiest DFS sport, golf and MLB. All right, we're back. Good old-fashioned internet blip there, but it's okay because we were building our FanDuel cash optimals here. All right, anyway. What were we talking about? We were talking about what sports were the hardest. Yeah, I do think golf is tough. Baseball, I do pretty well in baseball. I mean, the other side of this is that there are going to be certain sports that naturally are geared a little bit towards different strategies and different people. And I mean, there is some value. I think it is way overrated, way overrated, the value of being familiar with the league or watching games, I guess, in terms of how much that translates to DFS application, right? I think that it is assumed that, or maybe it was conventionally assumed that the best DFS players in a certain sport were just experts in NBA, for example, or NFL. It's not the case. But I do think there's different people are going to be more skilled at different games because of the way those games play, and there is some value to being familiar with the sport. So, but Brad, I missed this question. You said I didn't want to repeat myself. Did you see my question about Metu last night? I did not. So I don't know. I know last night was a bit of a mess. Like Mitchell Robinson got like scratched after lock. I think Metu didn't play. So honestly, at this point in the season, that stuff's going to happen. 100%. There's going to be late scratches after lock, and it's going to get worse than Metu and Mitchell Robinson. We will inevitably get our Giannis gets locked after his game locks game before the end of the season. Could be tonight. You never know. Playing the Thunder? Could. It'll get worse at the end of the month and into April. It's kind of, it comes with the territory in late season NBA where teams will scratch players and do things like that. But I also, the question may be totally different than what I thought. But if I remember correctly, there was like a Metu didn't play thing going on last night. So. Trey asked if I could run single entry FanDuel GPP. Honestly, I'm not going to just run different builds here just so we can stare at the lineups. I know all of you guys can run builds the same way I can here in the app. So, and if by chance you're not a SaberSim subscriber and you want to see some lineups, 7-day, no strings attached free trial on our site, SaberSim.com. So, let's see. Um, Matt has a question here. Do you think the higher likelihood of late scratches late in the season means it's better to spread out player exposures more? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. Naturally increasing the variance of the game, things that are 100% unpredictable, I think so. I also think another way of taking this would be to scale your bankroll back, your investment, your bankroll investment on a given slate back a little bit more, right? That's something that I typically tend to do. I think the other thing that's nice about that is that most sports lose a little bit of their casual fan base throughout the year, and as contests get a little bit sharper, I think one, to capitalize on the higher variance nature of the game, but also, or not even to capitalize, to avoid being, to avoid losing because of the unpredictable late scratch variance that you're going to get, but also because your theoretical ROI is going down in contests that are taken up by sharper players overall. I think scaling back a little bit as the year goes on is good. At least something to consider. But otherwise, yeah, I think reducing risk to those situations. And I think in some ways that can be a little bit predictable, right? Or not even, maybe not even in like, maybe not entirely predictable, but watching out for situations, games where maybe there's a team that doesn't have as much to play for, right? Or is it playing against a weaker opponent? This kind of situation is a little bit spooky. Like, I'm not saying fade Giannis or cap your exposure to Giannis, but keep your ears open, right? These are the kinds of games where those scratches happen. And also pay attention to, the news that can come out. When we had Jokic get scratched a couple days ago against the Rockets, right? Similar situation. I think that was like a 12-point spread before he got scratched. It sounds like he was actually sick, but when that late questionable tag comes out on a big name player as the day is going on or after lock, especially as we move on throughout this point in the season, I think those can be a pretty good sign that that's not good news. And that at the very least, it might be a good idea to try to get off of a little bit of that player with a quick late swap, or even get off completely with a quick swap or something like that. Or just be prepared to make a move when the time comes. So, but yeah, Brad, I don't know exactly what happened with this Metu situation. It's possible that the Kings have changed up their rotation a little bit too. I got on the bad side of Kelly Olynyk with the Pistons last night, at least on the prop betting side of things. It seems like the Pistons are very interested in getting Marvin Bagley minutes at the 4 and 5 now. And it seems like Olynyk was in a little bit of foul trouble last night too, but it seems like he's playing less minutes to me. Those kinds of situations, right, can be kind of hard to project. I don't really know what the situation is with Metu specifically again, but I know the Kings still somewhat recently acquired Sabonis. I don't know who else plays in that big man rotation there. But yeah, so I think I had 100% Metu in the night slate. So, but let's see. Marcus said, are you heavy into player props? And I'm curious, do you use SaberSim projections to weigh in those decisions? I honestly have been crushing it with the props on our new prop betting plan, which we currently have a waitlist to join. So if you want to get on the waitlist, you can email us, support@sabersim.com, or DM SaberSim Ross in Slack, and we'll get you on a wait list. But we've shifted our prop betting plan in the past couple months away from just a calculator tool where you can go in and basically plug anything into the calculator to more of kind of a picks-based model where we give a set of curated picks for a given slate based on what we think are the most profitable bets on a particular slate. From there, a lot of times I will basically just bet the picks that are in the prop betting plan. But I will also kind of try to get a sense of, a lot of times I will double down on a particular player and I will see if there are other opportunities. A lot of times, like for example, last night, one of our picks was an under on Jared Vanderbilt for the Timberwolves. I think it was under 11.5 rebounds, minus 110 or something like that. all of Vanderbilt's unders were profitable according to our sims and projections. So I jammed basically every Vanderbilt under on that I could find on that book. I think it was on Caesars, and all of them hit, right? We believed that the books were basically overvaluing. Well, I don't even want to say necessarily what the sims thought about that game. Maybe it was the blowout risk, which is what actually ended up happening. Maybe it was incorrect usage or whatever, but our sims basically thought that the implied projections of the lines that the books had for Vanderbilt's bets were all over. I jammed them all the unders. So, but cool. Marcus said, "Oh, that'll be cool. I'd love to be on the waiting list." Yeah, email us, support@sabersim.com, or message Ross in SaberSim Slack, and we'll get you on there. So cool. All right, I see a couple questions I had missed here in the Office Hours channel in Slack, so we'll hit these real quick. This one is from Jeff, and he said, when using SaberSim for NHL, is it better to allow skaters versus opposing goalies on or off? I would just use the default for what it is by default when you load up a slate. I think it's going to be off most of the time, except for very small slates. The reason why is skaters are obviously very negatively correlated to the opposing goalie, right? Let's go ahead. Austin Matthews' highest negative correlation is to the opposing team goalie, right? There's significant negative correlations there. Even actually, I would say even if you turn it on, okay, wait, it's on. Okay, it was on. It will be on for cash by default too. So even if it's off by default for GPPs for tonight, for example, 11 game slate, we don't need it on. Even if you turned it on, you're probably still not likely to get these players together in your lineups because they are, even because they're so negatively correlated, right? We're valuing correlation already. On very small slates, you will see that it does come on because at that point, when there are so few players in the pool, one, to build enough lineups, right? But two, also to build lineups that, have the potential to win, this will come on. On FanDuel for really small slates, I don't even think you could turn it off necessarily. I don't even think you can turn it off, period. The reason for that is because of rules that FanDuel has with lineup construction for the NHL side. But short answer here, I feel like I'm kind of rambling. Short answer is I would just go with the defaults. So. James had asked a question, any suggestion for 3 max for NBA? James, at the start of the stream, I talked about a overall kind of general strategy of how I would tackle single entry. I think for 3 max, it's very similar. I walked through an approach where you build a big pool of lineups and kind of via editing exposures and locking players or removing players from your pool can kind of arrive at a single entry lineup. I think that also works very well for NBA or for 3 max. I'm sorry. So I'd go and check that out. But overall, there's not a spectacularly different strategy you need for 3 max versus other contest sizes, right? The general core principles of building lineups for upside, thinking about correlation and ownership. A lot of these things that are somewhat automated by the builder are still important. But yeah, I'd go and I'd check. It was the very first thing I talked about on this stream. And I think instead of just looking at one lineup, you're looking at 3, but still following a similar set of steps is a really good way to approach that. So, and then Edward has a follow-up question here. And he said, as a follow-up to your single entry discussion to start the stream, let's say you use this strategy and lock 2 players into the lineup. As you go into the late swap process, will the lock stay in place? And I think that if one of these players were to be ruled out, would SaberSim swap then? Let's see. I believe. Okay, let's look. Let's go back to that build that we were messing with earlier. The answer is yes. We will keep this in place. But let's go back, and I want to kind of validate that here. Okay. So let's say this was our lineup. Let's reset here so we can get things back to the way they were. So let's say we locked. I know we had a couple things in here. We have kind of randomly locked LaMelo Ball, and let's lock Giannis because that was a part of the original lineup. And let's uncheck Payne just for fun. Okay, so this is our lineup. Let me rename this so we have it. Lineup. Okay, so if we go to the entry editor, so when you lock and remove players from your pool, right, those are essentially custom exposures. And those custom exposures will be ported over automatically. What's going on here? Oh, these are from before. Okay, those custom exposures will be ported over when you fill. So if we come over here and fill with the lineup, right, we can see there is a min exposure of 100 set for these two guys, and Payne has a maximum exposure of 0. So if we would late swap, these would be continued to be honored throughout the night. If you wanted to adjust that, right, maybe you got comfortable playing Payne throughout the night, you could remove that and it would work. I do believe I am pretty sure that, like, for example, if Giannis did get ruled out and was literally marked out later in the slate, that this minimum exposure you would set would be overridden at this point. So you would not have to worry about a situation where a minimum exposure of 100% that you had set to Giannis was getting overwritten or was taking precedent over the fact that he was projected for 0 and marked out. So you should be good to go there. But all right. Cool. Let's go ahead and leave it there. I don't see any other questions come in. We're a little over an hour here. So another great stream today. We will be right back again tomorrow. Same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern. So enjoy the slates tonight. If you have questions as you're building your lineups for tonight's slate, please feel free to fire away into Slack or email us, support@sabersim.com, and we'll be right back here again for tomorrow's stream. Until then, thanks. Good luck. See ya.